Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Story Hour. It's Wednesday, and where would you rather be than here? My name is Meg Elison, and I am your guest host, and I'm subbing in for the ever fascinating Laura Blackwell. Daniel Marcus started Story Hour to help people stay connected, to telling each other stories around this sort of a virtual campfire. Story Hour is at least partly brought to you by the SIFWA Givers Fund grant that helps keep the story light burning. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome. For those of you who are returning, who are becoming regulars, we love to see you. Thanks for coming around again. As always, tonight we have two writers who are reading their own work, complete works, not excerpts. And tonight we have Jenna Hanchey and KG Anderson. If you're on the Zoom, please feel free to join us in the chat and say hello if you would like. Let us know how you reacted to the story, how you feel. If you're joining us on Facebook, thank you, but please understand we might not see your messages right away. We love having you here, but we're not all in the same cocktail party. Without further ado, we have our first story tonight. Take it away, Jenna Hanchey.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for having me back on Story Hour. I'm going to be reading a story called The Devil's Hand, and it is published in the Paradise Icon 2023 anthology that is available on Amazon. So here we go. The devil glared over the top of his sunglasses as the demon chained to a rack in front of him screamed. Right. What's this about again? Well, Malthus squirmed, standing to his boss's left and holding his hell-issued clipboard unsteadily. It's a little complicated. Explain it. I don't like to be kept waiting. The demon in front of them yelped, twisting to avoid a flaming rope bearing down upon him. Malthus took an unconscious step back, smoothing his suit and making sure nothing unsavory had landed on it. Basically, Beelzebub here tried to, expand the domination plan subset C.4 soul selling initiative. But it didn't go as planned. The devil gave Malthus a curious look. Soul selling initiative? Is that what you call that thing I do when I'm bored every 100 years or so, hanging out at the crossroads, getting motorcycle riders and fiddle players to make a bum deal? The devil pulled off his sunglasses in exasperation. Look, I know you're convinced this corporate lingo is useful, but it's so unnecessarily complicated. Malthus assiduously checked his notes. It also offered him a means of avoiding the point for another few seconds. Yes, that's the initiative, all right. He paused. And if you think the corporate lingo is unnecessarily complicated, you're really not going to like this next part. Why? What did he do that landed him here? The devil waved his arm, encompassing the formidable array of torturous paraphernalia arranged around poor Beelzebub. Malthus gulped. The devil's next growl couldn't be ignored. What did he do, Malthus? He attempted to franchise it, I guess you could say. Again, Malthus, with the lingo, franchise. Yes, sir, I mean, he was committed, very committed to your instruction that the devil's hand should be in everything. So he tried to find ways to get us into the tech world, update our methods a bit. Malthus swallowed hard, knowing what happened to messengers. It's a great concept in theory. He took language directly from your eternally binding contract that the humans sign their names to in order to sell their souls, and made sure it was a legally binding part of all social media terms of service agreements. The devil was beginning to get frustrated, and that was never good. That sounds great. Fools sign those things all the time without reading them. So what? It didn't work? Oh no, sir. The problem is that it did. Just not in the way he intended. Rather than selling souls to us, he may have written it so that each retweet or like or comment sells a piece of someone's soul to another human, sir. The devil whipped around to face Malthus, grabbing his broad red shoulders with both hands. What? Malthus remained remarkably composed, considering. Yes, he squeaked. Thus, all this? He waved his arm in feeble mimicry of his master, though it couldn't move very far, given the vice-like grip the devil had on him. Coughing lightly, the Lord of Smoke and Fire, second in command of all hells, barely managed to force himself to say, "And there's more." "How could there possibly be more?" the devil roared. "Although you have a formidable number of souls under your control in each of the seven hells, the population of the earth has really expanded over the last century exponentially, and you seem to have lost the top position in terms of souls actually owned." Unable to stand his master's stony silence, Malthus continued quickly. "You're no longer the official king of hells, I'm sorry to say, because one human has managed to accumulate so many parts of souls that she technically has jurisdiction over your lordship." "She?" The devil shook Malthus so hard that one of his wings broke under the force. "Are you telling me that the king of all hells is now Taylor Swift or Beyonce or some other vapid celebrity?" "Well, not exactly. Interesting enough, the soul-selling calculations are not merely about quantity of followers or responses, but more substantially about the amount and quality of emotional investment made in the account being followed." In his enthusiasm for fascinating data, Malthus almost forgot he stood on quite treacherous ground. "Would you like to see the charts? I have them right here." "Arg!" the devil growled, hurling Malthus into a glass-encrusted wall. "Tell me who she is." Gritting his teeth, Malthus spoke through the pane. "Maud Mayberry, owner of Molasses, the amazing baking cat." Maud was having herself a delightful Tuesday before the devil came a-knocking on her door. She'd just gotten the most marvelous video of Molasses, daintily tipping vanilla into her chess pie in the making, and an adorable reaction shot when the kitty licked some of the raw vanilla, the vile-tasting stuff, from his paw. The chess pie was still in the oven, but Maud knew it'd turn out perfect. Her baking always did. "Chess pie's cooking right up now, folks. Bet you can't wait to see what it looks like." Maud winked at the phone camera, wedged securely in the ring light in front of her, as she slowly removed her apron. "And for all y'all out there stuck in the middle of something, worried about where life's going, feeling boxed in on all sides, don't you worry, darlings. You're just like my lovely chess pie here. Don't worry your pretty little heads. Sometimes you just need a little more bacon before you're ready for the next adventure." Meow. Her midnight diva of a cat didn't like to be left out. Molasses leapt up onto the counter and rolled in her discarded apron, wrapping himself up and batting the ties into the air. After a few seconds, he looked up at Maud, and she started the wrap-up. "That's all from Maud and Molasses for today, folks. We'll have a picture of that pie up here now as soon as it's done for y'all to enjoy. And you know I'd love to see your lovely delicacies as well, so don't be shy in sharing." Placing her hand reverently on her chest, Maud signed off. "May your hearts grow enough to love all who's around you. I know mine has." She'd just finished editing and posting the video when a thunderous knock shook the house to its very foundation. Shuffling in her cornflower slippers, Maud slowly made her way through the living room, passing the white-painted shelves dripping with knickknacks, and turned into the mudroom to find Molasses hissing at the front door, back arched high as she'd ever seen. "Hush, dearie," she scolded her companion lightly. "Just because they're rude doesn't mean we have to be." Molasses spat, but did as he was told. Maud nodded knowingly, and the sleek beast deftly hopped onto a nearby bench, before pivoting to land square upon her right shoulder. Thus bastioned, Maud opened the door. Two men stood there, one carrying a briefcase and the other looking like smoke was about to come out of his ears. The fuming one had clearly been doing the knocking, fists still raised in the air. Their dark hair curled around pale faces like snakes in the shadows. "Can I help you?" Maud asked politely. "Yes, ma'am," answered the fidgety one with the briefcase. "I hope so. You see, we have a financial proposition for you." "For me?" The old woman narrowed her eyes, evaluating the strange pair. "A very lucrative proposition, I think you'll find. One that a wise woman like yourself is sure to find appealing." The fuming one shifted quickly from fiery rage to charming smolder. Molasses's claws dug into her shoulder, and Maud pursed her lips. She'd never had time for men that thought they could get on with secretive smiles and pretty words, and certainly not ones who tried to tell her what to think. Besides that, Molasses could spy a scoundrel a mile away. "Well, I sure do appreciate y'all coming by, but I got a pie in the oven and a little darling here to feed." Maud started to close the door, but a sharply polished black shoe wedged in before she could. "We will be coming in." Flames rose in the smolderer's eyes. "Well, now, I don't think so," replied Maud, unafraid, but getting angry. No one came into her house without her say-so. "Take a seat there on the porch. I'll bring out some lemonade, and then y'all can say your piece." She locked the door behind her as she went to fetch the lemonade. No reason to take chances with folks like these. Molasses meowed quizzically, still riding atop her slightly stooped shoulder. "Don't worry, darling. I've got this under control." Malthus winced at the squeak in his rocking chair. He did not like the way this was going, not one bit. The devil refused to sit, pacing back and forth across the porch as they waited for the tottering hag to return, which felt like it was taking forever. Every second they spent here meant more souls lost, which for Malthus meant more possibility of taking Beelzebub's place on the rack when they returned. He pulled out the paperwork and set it on his lap, absent-mindedly pushing the edges to make sure everything aligned. Though it would be best for her to sign in blood, always preferred, he guessed they weren't about to get that woman to so much as prick her little finger. So he settled for a fancy fountain pen, which he carefully laid atop the perfectly stacked pile. He was almost actually beginning to enjoy the back and forth motion of this strange seat when the door creaked open and Maud trundled out. In spite of himself, Malthus was quite impressed at the old woman's ability to balance a tray carrying a pitcher of lemonade, 3 glasses, 3 plates, and accompanying forks, and a steaming chess pie, all while a growling cat sat perched on her shoulder. The devil stopped his pacing, whirling around to watch as Maud carefully set the tray down and started slicing the dessert. "Well, all right now, gentlemen," Maud finally allowed after everyone had been served. "What's this all about?" The devil's gaze fell on him hard, like the asteroid they sent to eliminate the pesky dinosaurs. Between that and Maud's stony expression, Malthus was quite uncomfortable. "So, he sputtered, fibbing poorly, "we represent a conglomeration of media companies whose platforms you use, and we need you to sign an updated terms of service agreement in order to continue utilizing our products. We've brought the paperwork over ourselves so as not to interrupt your usage, and we're willing to offer a generous payment to ensure the timeliness of your cooperation." "I'm just an old lady making baking and cat videos. I may not be a techno-indigenous or whatever they call those young folk, but I know my way around. So I don't see why you 2 ill-dressed ruffians have come knocking on my door, rather than making me click something online before signing in again." Malthus squirmed in his chair. Well, the devil interrupted before he could come up with something. You see, ma'am, his lordship said with a smarmy grin. We try to personally support those who are doing excellent work, such as yourself. With your, he paused, visibly composing himself, cat videos. You might think of this as a bonus, one deserved for all your viral posts. And while we're here, he shrugged, arms open wide, we thought we may as well just kill two humans with one axe and update your terms of service at the same time. Malthus grimaced at the phrasing, shooting a worried glance at the woman across from him. His lordship's idioms were not always up to human standards. Maud rocked thoughtfully in her chair, no reaction visible in her comportment. The devil was standing, but stationary at least. The lemonade seemed to have calmed his agitation. The two demons waited, one fearful and the other impatient, to hear what Maud would say. Molasses purred loudly from the old woman's lap, the only sound infiltrating the tense silence. Seems I've got you two over a barrel now, don't it? Maud finally replied. Although the second in command of all hells had heard the phrase about one's heart dropping into one's stomach before, this was the first time he'd ever felt it. What? The devil's body tightened, all attempts at charm gone. I ain't gonna sign your papers, and I don't suppose y'all can do anything about it. Woman, you have no idea who you are dealing with, the devil shouted, advancing on Maud from over Malthus's shoulder. I think you got that backwards now, Maud said tightly, her words as cold as the devil's were hot. You don't know me at all. The devil froze, thrown off by the edge to Maud's tone. Malthus surprised himself by having to fight back a grin. No one had ever spoken to the king of all hells like that before. He took a bite of pie in his delight, but then almost choked as realization landed. He looked at Maud, eyes wide. His lordship was not, actually, the king of all hells anymore. Malthus bolted upright, throwing his rocking chair off balance and sending the pie flying into his pristine suit. Maud stroked her cat, a small smirk on her face. Y'all can go on back to the devil now and tell him I ain't signing no new terms. I read every little thing I'm asked to put my name to twice, if need be to understand it. I know the power of names, you see, and mine means something. I don't give it out lightly. I also know about them souls I've gone and collected, and seeing as I ain't in this for the money, y'all got nothing left to offer me. This time the demon couldn't hold back. An unfortunate giggle erupted from his chest at the very moment the devil exploded from his suit, both cloth and skin, to appear in his full, terrifying glory right there on Maud Mayberry's porch. Malthus clapped a hand over his treacherous mouth. How dare you fail to recognize me? You think me a mere minion, equal to this pathetic creature? Malthus's eyes flared a bit as the devil gestured at him dismissively. Look upon me. I am the Lord of Lies, fallen star of the high heavens, exalted king of the seven hells. You shall bow before me, hag. The horned crimson beast thundered at Maud, unfurling his bat-like wings and lifting clenched fists high into the air. But Maud just kept rocking and smiling and petting her cat. Before he knew what he was doing, Malthus heard himself say, well, actually, I believe Maud here is officially the exalted king of the seven hells at the moment. Maud grinned at him and winked. And from what I gather, she continued, that's the only one of your titles that holds water, the rest being nicknames and such. I told you, she said, rocking back and forth. I know the power of names. The devil raged and roared, but the sound faded to white noise as Malthus held the keen old woman's gaze. He felt himself begin to relax for the first time in, well, an eternity. Picking up a glob of buttery goodness off of his chest, he leaned back and popped it into his mouth, savoring the sweet taste as it spread across his tongue, before chasing it with a dash of cool lemonade. Maud placed her hands on her hips as she surveyed her new territory. We got a lot of work to do here, Malthus, my boy. As an eternal being, Malthus was fairly certain he'd never been referred to as boy before, but coming from the exalted Maud, he didn't mind. She clapped a hand on his shoulder. I'm going to be trusting you to help me get all these other folks on board. Malthus nodded, looking over his notes. Right. I've got the design changes down. I'll put a few hundred demons on it and we'll set the groundwork for the new 7 levels of community in no time. Pausing, he leaned to pet Molasses, who was vibrating as he wound around the demon's hooved feet. Looking up again, he bit his lip. I'm afraid I just don't quite understand the logic of it, though. Well, son, it's like this. I may have collected bits and pieces of a whole heap of souls, enough to make me High King of the 7 communities, ruler of the new hell. But you see, they've also been collecting mine all the time, too. Every follower what made me smile or happened to like a photo of my recipe. They got a piece of me with that, just like I got a piece of them. So I'm thinking, the new hell's got to be a reflection of the fact we all own pieces of souls, see? I'm figuring we teach everybody to value the souls they've got. And remember that other folks out there are cherishing their soul too. She laughed. As far as I can figure, this whole thing started when the devil wanted his hand in everything and everyone. Well, now I suppose we've done it. Except I'm the devil now. And I may have my hand in everyone. But they got theirs in me too. And Malthus jotted something down. So that means part of the ways community placement is decided is by intensity of soul attachments between the different folks. He stumbled over the last word. Residents of Hell had traditionally been much more colorful in their appellations. See, you get it. Maud looked at him proudly. You learn quickly, Malthus. I'm right pleased to have you as my second in command. Molasses leapt up onto a dark spire of rock, which reminded the demon that the fortifications definitely needed a new color scheme. The fretting feline mewed at Maud, twirling his tail in slight distress. Oh, don't you worry, darling, Maud answered. I know where that devil's gone. I ain't the new lord of hell for nothing. Let him try to meet with those technological overlords for as long as he wants. They can talk till they're blue in the face, but they can't stop us now. Leaning over slightly, the new ruler of hell, designer of community living, gestured for Molasses to take his familiar post on her shoulder. Let's go look at the progress in Community 3. Take your little mind off things. She smirked, and the demon at her side could have sworn he saw an ocean wave crash in her eyes. I'm telling you again, I got this under control. Watching Maud slowly shuffle away, Malthus felt an unusual pressure in his broad red torso. He began to intuit the meaning of another human turn of phrase as his chest expanded, releasing his heart like it was going to take flight. Perhaps the new Lord of Sugar and Water, second in command of the 7 levels of community, perhaps this was hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenna. That's a wonderful story. If you look through the chat, it's been extremely lively with all of us talking about what a good time we were having. Jenna Hanchey has been called a badass fairy, and she attempts to live up to the title. A professor of critical and cultural studies at Arizona State University, her research looks at how speculative fiction can imagine decolonization and bring it into being. Her own writing tries to support this project of creating better futures for us all. Her fiction's been nominated for a British Science Fiction Award and appears in Nature, If There's Anyone Left, and Little Blue Marble, among other venues. Follow her adventures at jennahanchey.com. All right, before we move on to our second reading, we're going to have everybody take a nice deep breath. so that we are free and clear to enjoy our story from KG Anderson. Please take it away.
Okay, I'm going to tell you the story of Captain Carthy's bride, and it's a little dark, so that's my warning. The midday sun seared the rocky shore. Seaweed baked, periwinkles shriveled in their shells, and the acrid smells of life and death rose and fell on the sighing waves. At the sound of a truck stopping on the cliff above, Sheila O'Farrell quickly lay back on the narrow spit of sand and closed her eyes. Footsteps coming down the cliffside trail. A rattle and clank from the pathway suggested that someone had set down a fishing rod and a bucket of bait. The young sea captain, for sure. Sheila imagined him raising the Admiralty binoculars he wore on a leather strap around his neck. Sheila lay naked, her flame red hair spread out like a corona. She lay with delicate ankles crossed, pale arms flung wide, and small breasts bared to the sun. Behind her on the rocks, a sealskin lay where she'd placed it earlier, glistening in the sun, a Selkie's coat. There was a soft crunching of sand and steps on the pathway. The walker stopped near the sealskin. Sheila bit her lip. He's taking the bait. She imagined Rob Carthy lifting the Selkie's coat, the velvety fur redolent of brine and sun, and holding it warm and heavy in his big hands. The footsteps retreated. Sheila raised her head to steal a glance at the rocks. The sealskin was gone. He'll hide the coat in his truck, and then he'll be back for me. Sheila guessed right. Carthy returned to find her acting out a search for the missing sealskin. She hobbled, her feet slipping in the hot sand as though her ankles were weak. Her tiny hands splayed flat on the rocks, as if her legs could not support her weight on land. Miss, he called out, I have your coat. We all know the rules. I've brought a shirt to cover you, and I'll carry you up the path. Sheila straightened up and gazed at the young sea captain with her sea-green eyes. She'd heard how he'd been decorated in the Great War, how he'd been newly promoted to the rank of captain. She'd heard that he prided himself on being a fair man. She watched as he licked his lips, chapped and salty, and saw him watching the sway of her breasts. Sheila started toward him, then stopped, and turned to take a last look at the sea. Little waves splashed and hissed on the sand, spitting foam. She scanned the shallow water at the edge of the cove, and although the sun beat down, she shivered. Turning back to her captor, Sheila nodded and began ankling awkwardly toward him across the sand with her arms extended. The captain met her halfway and dropped to his knees before her. Shrugging out of his blue linen shirt, he wrapped her tiny body, flushed with sunburn, in the weathered cloth. He tenderly rolled the cuffs above her wrists, while her wild red hair, stiff with sea salt, whipped against his face. Then he picked her up and carried her, unprotesting, up the path. He set her in the passenger seat of the truck's high cab, patted her arm reassuringly, and closed the heavy door. Sheila bowed her head and sighed as she waited for Carthy to walk around to the driver's side and get in. It had gone just as she'd planned. A deep, shuddering breath. There'd be no turning back. As he drove them out of Carmog, Sheila nestled against him, ducking her head, not from shyness, but from fear of being spotted by someone who might recognize her. He drove straight down the coast to his house in Kilronan. The village inn where he'd been staying in Carmog sent his bags after them. In her new life, as Captain Carthy's Selkie bride, he named her Maura, Sheila soon acquired human ways, perhaps too quickly. But Carthy, madly in love, never suspected. The Selkie soon spoke quite well, with a charming rural accent. He told people she'd picked it up from their housekeeper. Her ankles strengthened. She was able to walk and even dance, though she always favored lace-up boots over slippers and shoes. When she began to go out in Kilronan, Maura was the subject of much interest, because the captain had been an eligible bachelor, and many of the ladies of the town were bitter to discover he'd brought home a wife from somewhere on his travels. The couples were reticent about her origins, each for their own reasons. Gossip had it that she was an island beauty he'd won in a pub fight in the Hebrides. Too close for comfort, Maura thought, when she thought about it, which was rarely. because Maura was all too busy learning how to fulfill her dream of being a sea captain's wife. While never elegant, she developed an air of competence and satisfaction, and she truly doted on Carthy. She knew that her husband watched her closely for signs of longing for her native sea. Did the Selkie let her errands draw her near the harbor where his company's ships were moored? She made sure that he saw no sign of it. In fact, quite the opposite. Maura actively avoided the harbor and even refused strolls on the scenic esplanade. When the family, they soon had a boy and a girl, vacationed, Maura was the one insisting that the family go inland. She told Carthy she liked visiting castles and mills. Did she ever hunt for her marvelous coat, a Selkie's only route back to the sea? Again, he could see no indications. But even if his wife had searched, her search would have been in vain, for Carthy had hidden the lush coat in a secret panel of the wall of the purser's office on one of the company's smaller ships, a vessel that even he rarely boarded. It was only after their son, young Rob, had gone off to university and their daughter, Allison, a plump, sweet-faced girl with her father's raven hair, had married and moved up to the coast, that the trouble began. On the night of the first autumn storm, the sound of the crashing waves woke Maura from her sleep. She slipped out of their big feather bed and stepped out in the hall, just in time to see a foaming wave rushing down the narrow staircase from the attic. Her scream brought her husband stumbling out into the hall in his nightshirt. She pointed a trembling finger at the damp stairs. Ah, it's only a roof leak, the captain said, urging her back to bed. But Maura could not be consoled. She sat up all night with the lights on and, in the morning, threw clothes into a bag and decamped to a hotel to await repairs. She returned to find that a second flood had occurred, this one in their kitchen. The contractor Carthy summoned was puzzled over the water's source. "Would you look at this here?" Maura trembled as the workman towed a stubborn white rime the flood had left on the linoleum. The man shook his head. "You'd think it was salt water." Now Maura was afraid to take baths. She insisted that a creature from the drain would seize her by the neck and pull her under the water. Carthy installed a modern handheld spray fixture to enable her to wash, but she fretted that the shower water smelled of seaweed and tasted of brine. When the children came for the holidays, Maura put on a brave face, but they knew something was wrong. Terror had streaked their mother's red hair with gray, and her appearance verged on the unkempt. They took their father aside and urged him to action, and he agreed. "I think your mother and I should move," Carthy announced that night as the family sat down to dinner. "I'm nearing to retirement, and a move somewhere smaller and cozier would make perfect sense." Maura, seating her grandson Kerry at the lace-draped table, broke into a delighted smile. The captain reached into his tweed jacket and pulled out a sheaf of brochures. "I've consulted an estate agent. There's some wonderful properties up by Carmog, where we met so long ago." "No!" Maura paled and hurried from the room, leaving her soup untouched. "What is Mamo so afraid of?" Kerry asked. The adults exchanged looks. No one could answer. The village of Carmog had changed not a whit, Maura saw. She parked her Vauxhall Cadet on a side street and picked her way across the wet cobblestones. The widow O'Farrell's whitewashed cottage looked as shabby as ever. Maura tried to peer through a lace-curtained window. Useless. Taking a deep breath, she rapped on the green door. "Who is it?" The quavering voice from within was familiar. "It's me." There were sounds of someone cursing and a cane tapping on a slate floor. "Wasn't expecting visitors." A bent, gray-haired woman peered out and frowned at the city woman on her doorstep. Maura suddenly regretted wearing tailored trousers instead of a proper tweed skirt. "May I?" "Yes, yes, come in." The old woman turned and limped to the tiled hearth and began prodding at the peat fire. Maura closed the door behind her and stood on the mat, looking shyly around the dim-lit room. The kitchen table was set for a simple tea for two people: cups, teapot, bread loaf, butter, and a dish of jam. Do Do you remember me? Maura asked. And should I? Maura licked her lips. I'm Sheila O'Farrell, your daughter. The old woman tottered back a few steps and sank into a kitchen chair. She patted the worn linen tablecloth until she found her wire-rimmed glasses. She pulled them on and peered hard into Maura's green eyes. She nodded slowly. We thought you was dead. The old woman's tone was accusing, but her voice trembled. They find your coaling down at the cove. A drowning, the police said. The Pearson boys claimed they saw a girl who looked like you leaving town with a man in a truck, but when you never wrote. Maura took in the shabby surroundings. Her family's cottage looked much the same as it had on the bright September day 25 years earlier that she'd walked down to the beach to wait for her captain. A tear ran down her cheek, making a dark stain on her expensive silk blouse. I'm married, Ma, she said, tasting on her tongue the rich brogue she'd suppressed for so many years, and he's a rich man. That I can see. The old woman looked pointedly at the gold and diamond rings that sparkled on Maura's fingers. Children? Yes, 2. But Maura stopped, as always, cautious about revealing any details of her past. The old woman got up and fetched a 3rd cup from the sideboard. She placed it on the table and poured. Only then did Maura come to the table and gingerly sit down at what had once been her place. Too good for Johnny Ahern, you were, her mother said, her tone more wistful than accusing. Johnny Ahern was a drunk, Ma. Maura took the filled teacup the old woman pushed toward her, a familiar blue rose pattern, the porcelain now stained and chipped. How are Olivia and Caitlin? Mrs. O'Farrell shook her head. It's gone badly for us. Poor Olivia died just after you left. She was always sickly. Caitlin? Caitlin. She'll be coming by shortly to bring me the shopping and have her tea, if she remembers. I'm afraid Caitlin's in a bad way, Sheila. A drinker, just like your dad. The old woman sighed, and when she sees those fancy clothes of yours, she'll be asking you for money. Maura took a sip of the Assam tea, dark and rich with memories. She put her slim white hand with its gleaming gold rings over her mother's gnarled one. The old woman did not resist. Have you come back to us now? Had she? Maura took another sip, but this time she choked and spat the liquid into her palm. To her horror, the tea had turned bitter and salty, a harsh reminder of the reason for her visit. Ma, she whispered. Ma, I've done something terrible. Oh, I don't blame you for leaving this place. It's not the leaving, Maura said. It's how I left, Ma. I wanted a proper husband, not a drunk like Johnny Ahern. But what man would want to marry the girl who cleans the toilets at the inn? When that captain from the city came to town on his fishing trip, I heard him talking in the pub. I saw my chance. I pretended to be a selkie, and I let him capture me. The old woman gave a rusty chuckle. You told the poor man you were a selkie, and he believed you? I waited for him on the beach. I pretended to have trouble walking. I let him teach me how to talk. Maura faltered, putting into words the story she'd kept secret for so many years. I let him find the Selkie's coat. Now, where'd you get a Selkie's coat? Her mother frowned. You fooled the man with some ratty old sealskin, did you? No. Maura stopped. Perhaps she'd said too much. She half stood to go and then sank back down in the old kitchen chair and made her confession. Ma, I killed the Selkie. I killed her with a rock as she lay sunning on the beach, and then I stole the coat she'd left there. I rolled her body into the sea and let the tide take it. Maura shuddered, remembering the sight of the pale body as it slipped beneath a sparkling green wave. You didn't, the old woman whispered. Maura nodded. In the silence, the peat fire smoked and crackled. Killed a Selkie, the old woman muttered, shaking her head. Oh, that's bad. She looked sharply at her daughter. And she's come for you now, hasn't she? Yes, Ma, there's water everywhere in our house. I thought after so many years that I'd be safe, but you need to be going. The old woman waved a gnarled hand. Go as far from the sea as you can. Go now. Moira reached over to touch her mother's arm, but the old woman pulled away, darting glances around the cottage as if expecting seawater to rush in under her own door. Go now. Sorry, Ma, Moira said, standing up. The woman shooed her far away. Moira left the shabby cottage and walked along the grimy cobblestones to where she'd parked her car. The route she took as she drove out of Carmog was not the main high motorway on which she'd come up from Kilronan. It was the winding coast road that overlooked the cove where so many years before she'd killed the Selkie, where she'd waited for Rob Carthy. And when she reached the pullout above the cove, Moira stopped her car and stepped out into a rising wind. I'm going home, her note had said. As soon as he found it, Rob Carthy drove down to the harbor. He boarded the old freighter and removed the oilskin bundle he'd hidden in the bulkhead a quarter century ago. The Selkie's coat, still smelling of brine and the sun. With the coat plush and glistening on the seat beside him, he sped up the motorway to Carmog. He found his wife's car parked on a side street and waited, watching as she emerged from a dilapidated cottage. He followed her out of town as she drove to the lonely coast. He recognized the road she took. Tears filled Carthy's eyes. He had stolen a Selkie from her home. He had kept her from her sea. He remembered the hot sun on the bright, sparkling sea, the coat glistening silver on the rocks, the firmness of her body as he'd carried her up from the sea. He'd committed a terrible sin, keeping a sea creature trapped for years. And she'd held up so nobly, borne their children, been a loving wife. He should have known the day would come, that the call of the sea would become irresistible. She would be compelled to return to the frigid green waters. And without the coat he'd so cruelly hidden from her, she would die. Parking his truck behind her car, the captain took the coat in his arms. He sighed with relief when he spotted his wife, his Selkie, poised on the cliff above the dark, swirling waters that were her home. She'd released her hair from its neat chignon, and it flew around her head like red and silver ribbons. Moira turned as her husband approached. At the sight of the Selkie's coat, she screamed and stepped back, stumblingly dangerously close to the cliff edge. Carthy reached out a hand, catching hers, and pulled her to him. She sobbed piteously. He kissed the top of her head and thought how he would miss her. My dear sweet wife, he said, please forgive me for taking you from the sea. He drew the sumptuous sealskin, smelling of the long ago sea, over her shoulders. Moira flinched. Then she looked up at Rob, her green eyes wide and bright with tears. She nodded slowly. With his forefinger, he traced the faint smile on her lovely lips. He lifted her in his arms as he had on that day they met. He took a few steps to the cliff's edge. Then he lofted her clear of the ledge and watched as his Selkie tumbled down, 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 and vanished into the angry sea.
Thank you so much for that deeply unsettling story. K.G. Anderson is a late blooming writer of SF, mystery, and dark fantasy who hails from the foggy coast, wouldn't wonder, of the Pacific Northwest. Prior to finding her speculative fiction muse, she reported on politics and crime, reviewed hundreds of mystery novels, and wrote about pop music for the iTunes Music Store. Her short stories appear in Galaxy's Edge and Space and Time magazine, as well as in anthologies from Wild Blood Press, Third Flatiron, and B Cubed Press. For links to her work, please visit writerway.com/fiction. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight for Story Hour on this Wednesday for two spectacular stories. We heard some great stuff, didn't we? If you wish to revisit these stories, they will be available on the recording on Facebook. And I want to wish everybody a good night. Are we all set? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Meg.